The first time I saw Cordelia Blackthorne standing knee-deep in filthy floodwater, screaming at a road her own husband had forced through protected wetlands, I almost laughed, and I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. There she was. This woman who'd spent months acting like federal law was a cute little suggestion, now watching her own neighborhood drown, because she thought dirt, concrete, and arrogance could outvote nature. And all I could think was my daughter had warned her first. 6 months earlier, when I bought my house in Pristine Meadows, I honestly believed I was buying peace. After a brutal divorce at 52, peace sounded better than romance, better than ambition, better than whatever came next. I'd spent 20 years as an environmental engineer, designing stormwater systems all across the Southeast, and I was tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. I wanted quiet mornings, birdsong, coffee on the porch, and weekends with my 8-year-old daughter Emma, where the biggest decision we had to make was whether we were looking for frogs, turtles, or salamanders that day. That was the real reason I chose the place. Not the house, not the square footage, not the so-called curb appeal. It was the wetlands behind the subdivision. 40 acres of protected preserve, ancient seasonal pools, tall grass, cypress knees sticking up out of the earth like old hands. Emma loved that place with her whole heart. She had names for the turtles, theories about the frogs, and this absolute faith that if something beautiful was protected, then that meant it would stay safe. Kids believe words like protected and forever mean something. That's the part that hurts. She used to call it Daddy's secret kingdom. Every other weekend, she'd come over in rubber boots with her hair tied up crooked, and we'd walk those trails together. She'd hear a splash and freeze. She'd crouch down to inspect eggs in shallow water, like she was some tiny field biologist with serious schedule. After the divorce, those mornings stitched something back together in both of us. You can survive a lot when a child still looks at you like you can fix the world. Then Cordelia Blackthorne walked into my life smelling like gardenia perfume and cigarette smoke, and peace ended right there. I met her at the new resident orientation. I made the mistake of mentioning my work background, thinking maybe the HOA would actually appreciate having someone around who understood drainage, wetlands, conservation, all that. She looked at me with that polished smile some people use when they're insulting you in a church voice. She said, "We prefer residents who value progress over red tape, Mr. Thornfield." That told me almost everything I needed to know. Cordelia ran the HOA like a small-town queen who'd been denied a larger kingdom. She was in her late 50s, always stiff-backed, perfectly dressed, always speaking like every sentence had already been rehearsed. Her husband, Victor, owned a construction company that somehow kept winning neighborhood improvement contracts. Funny how that works. Between the two of them, they treated the neighborhood like a private business with hostages. At first, I tried to stay out of it. I really did. But then one morning, orange survey stakes appeared in the preserve. Emma saw them before I did. She stopped on the trail and squeezed my hand. "Daddy," she said, "why are there sticks in the turtle pools?" That question sat like a rock in my chest. A few weeks later, Cordelia announced a plan at the HOA meeting with the kind of smile politicians use when they're about to sell disaster as convenience. They were pushing a new access road straight through the southeastern part of the wetlands to connect our subdivision to the shopping center nearby. She talked about commute times, property values, easier errands, better access. People nodded. Some looked excited. Nobody in that room, besides me, understood what that road actually meant. I raised my hand and asked the obvious question. Have the environmental studies been done? Cordelia waved one hand like she was brushing lint off a jacket. She said they had consulted local authorities and everything was under control. Local authorities, not federal agencies, not the Army Corps, not anybody who actually had jurisdiction over protected wetlands. That's when my stomach dropped. The next day I drove down to the county office, dug through permit records, and found exactly what I expected. Nothing. No wetland crossing permit. No federal review. No impact study. No consultation. They weren't cutting corners. They were pretending corners didn't exist. I went deeper after that. Pulled the original deed records. Found the environmental protection clauses in black and white. Permanent restrictions. No grading, no altering drainage, no development in the preserve. It was all there. Clean, clear, not subtle. So I brought the documents to an emergency HOA meeting and laid them out on the table. I explained federal protection. I explained the fines. I explained what wetlands actually do, how they store floodwater, slow runoff, protect homes by absorbing what would otherwise rush straight into foundations and basements. I kept my tone calm, because once a room decides you're emotional, half of them stop listening. Cordelia didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just smiled and framed me as the difficult newcomer who cared more about frogs and families. And that worked. That's the thing people don't like admitting. Manipulation works, especially when it comes wrapped in confidence and promises of rising property values. The board voted proceed. By Monday morning, bulldozers were already at the edge of the preserve. Emma was with me when they started. I can still hear the engines, still hear the metal grinding, the trees snapping, the wet suck of heavy tracks chewing through soft ground. She stood there in her little boots, crying so hard she could barely breathe, and asked me, "Are they squishing my turtle friends?" You ever have one of those moments where something inside you just changes shape? That was mine. Up to then, this had been a legal issue, a professional issue, a civic issue. After that, it became personal. I started documenting everything. Photos, timestamps, GPS points, runoff patterns, missing erosion controls, direct damage to the pools. I filed formal complaints with the EPA and the state. I sent certified letters. I built a paper trail, so clean even a lazy investigator could follow it. Cordelia responded exactly the way people like her always do, not by answering the facts, by punishing the person who brought them up. One HOA violation notice showed up on my windshield for a bird bath being too tall, then a fence issue, then my mailbox placement, half an inch off, apparently. Every day there was another petty fine, another citation, another reminder that when small people get a little power, they use it like a weapon. Then Gladys came to my door. She was a board treasurer, in her 70s, nervous as a bird, holding banana bread like she needed an excuse to be brave. She told me Cordelia had threatened her for asking questions about the finances. Then I started hearing more. Another family got targeted after asking about the costs. Somebody else got inspected after raising concerns about the preserve. It wasn't just me. Cordelia had been intimidating the whole neighborhood into silence. That changed things. A few more people started talking to me quietly. Then Dr. Marcus Webb stepped in. Retired hydrologist, sharp mind, not much patience for nonsense. He'd been watching the runoff and water quality. He told me what I already feared. If a serious storm came through, that new road would act like a dam. The wetlands had been the sponge. Destroy the sponge, and all that water had to go somewhere. And where it would go was into our neighborhood. Then the twist I never saw coming dropped into my lap in a courthouse basement. I was pulling old property records when I found the original conservation easement from 1987. Not just a covenant, not just HOA language. A real easement, recorded and permanent, tied to the land itself. The preserve had been legally protected in a way that ran with every property in the subdivision. I called an attorney I knew, Samantha Hartwell, and read it to her. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Rex, if that easement was violated badly enough, you could have title problems all across that neighborhood." I sat there in that dusty basement staring at the page, feeling sick, because now I had a weapon big enough to destroy Cordelia. And innocent people would get caught in the blast. That was the hardest part of the whole thing. Not the threats, not the fines, not even Emma crying in the mud. It was realizing that being right doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it feels heavy. Sometimes justice comes with collateral damage, and you got to decide how much ruin you're willing to unleash just to stop someone worse. I gave the conservation group a little time, asked them to hold off while I tried one more route. Then the weather forecast changed. Tropical storm Helena was pushing north, carrying the kind of rainfall that makes engineers stop joking and start checking numbers twice. Marcus and I ran the models again. For inches in 12 hours would be bad. 6 to 8 would be catastrophic. We installed gauges, took measurements, logged everything, and Cordelia kept building. Faster, actually. She must have sensed the walls closing in, because her crew started working day and night under floodlights. They cut my trail cameras, slashed my tires, left me a note telling me to leave if I knew what was good for me. That kind of thing would scare some people. Me, it just made me more careful. Then I learned Blackthorn Construction was already drowning in debt. That was the second twist. Through a contact and more money than I should have been risking, I bought up enough of their outstanding debt to put pressure on Victor fast. It wasn't noble. It wasn't pretty. But by then I was done pretending nice people always win by staying nice. Sometimes the only language bullies understand is consequence. By the time Helena hit, the road was nearly finished. Rain started Friday night. Hard, steady, ugly. By midnight, my monitors showed exactly what I'd feared. Water backing up behind the roadbed instead of spreading into the wetlands like it was supposed to. By 2 in the morning, calls started coming in. Basements flooding, water rising, some pumps failing. Then more calls. Pine Street, Maple Avenue, house after house. At 4:30, my phone rang again. Cordelia. For the first time since I'd met her, she sounded small. She said, "You have to fix this." I stood in my kitchen, watching rain hammer the dark outside, and told her the truth. The wetlands you destroyed were the fix. By dawn, 23 homes had water damage. Expensive homes, too. $500,000 houses, sitting in muddy water, like the neighborhood, had been dropped into a swamp it had tried to erase. And right in the middle of the flood zone sat Cordelia's big colonial, taking on water exactly where Marcus said it would. Nature doesn't negotiate. That was the lesson. Doesn't care about charm, money, power, or unanimous HOA vote. Water goes where physics tells it to go. Every single time. The media showed up that morning. Then federal inspectors. Then water testing found contamination from construction runoff. The whole thing blew open at once. The illegal wetland destruction, the fake compliance story, the chemical dumping, the flood damage. Suddenly, all those neighbors who'd rolled their eyes at salamanders were standing in soaked drywall and moldy carpet, learning the expensive version of a lesson. Court on Monday felt less like a hearing and more like a public reckoning. I testified. Marcus testified. Samantha introduced the easement documents. The judge shut the project down on the spot. Federal investigators launched the criminal side. Cordelia's lawyer looked like a man who'd aged 10 years in one recess. When the conservation easement came up in court, the room went dead quiet. That's when everybody understood how close they'd all come to losing a lot more than a road fight. In the end, the neighborhood survived. Barely. The road was removed. Restoration money came in. A new board got elected. Insurance battled. Lawyers circled. Contractors swore. Everybody blamed everybody. But the land started healing. And so did Emma. 6 months later, she walked beside me through the restored wetlands, holding a little camera in both hands, grinning so hard I thought her face might split. Frogs were back. Turtles, too. The salamanders returned to the spring pools like they had never signed away their home in the first place. She looked up at me and said, "You kept your promise." That right there, that mattered more than court win, more than the headlines, more than watching Cordelia's empire collapse under the weight of its own greed. Though I'll admit, that part was satisfying too. Her husband ended up serving time. Fines hit them hard. Their flooded house went up for sale after the bankruptcy dust settled. And yes, I bought it. Not because I needed a bigger house. Not because I wanted a trophy. I bought it because some endings deserve a little poetry. These days, that place helps fund wildlife rehab and environmental education for local kids. Emma likes to call it the Turtle House. Last time we were there, she stood in what used to be Cordelia's bedroom and said, dead serious, I think this room is better for animals than it ever was for people. Honestly, she wasn't wrong. What I learned from all this is simple and ugly and true. A lot of people only respect a law when breaking it finally costs them more than obeying it would have. And power, even the silly suburban kind, can make people believe they're above consequence for way too long. But consequence always shows up. Maybe not on your schedule. Maybe not in the form you expect. But it shows up sometimes in a courtroom. Sometimes in ankle-deep mud. Sometimes in the middle of the night, when the water starts rising and all the warnings you mock come back floating to your front door. So tell me, when somebody abuses power and drags innocent people into fallout, where do you draw the line between justice and revenge? And have you ever dealt with a person who thought the rules were for everybody but them? Share your story and tell me whose side you would have been on, because I can promise you this around here. People still argue about whether I saved the neighborhood or just made sure karma had a clear path in.